We'll
Nate,
get them.
you are a volunteer of the atheist community of Austin, just like I am, and also you are a current host of Secular Sexuality, which is another show that we do here on the show. So you are joining me today on Truth Wanted. We do a little crossover stuff today, and we just want to talk about your story, Nate. We want to talk about how you came to where you are today. You actually grew up as a Christian before you took on the label of atheist for yourself. So like let's get started. Like how did you grow up and where did it all come from?
Yes, I did start off as a Christian until I was kind of old enough to know better, I suppose.
Mm.
But I've heard you say that like you don't like how did people become atheists in the in the 80s and then the 90s?
Mm-hmm.
You know, before there was no
It's
internet, there
shocking
was
to me.
no
It's
yeah.
shocking to me for sure, because I live in an area of the world of the Bible Belt where you just really can't, even today, much more so when I was a kid, but even today, it's still very taboo to talk about. So it's just hard for me to imagine even finding a sense of community if you don't do that through the internet. So,
Yeah, well, the sense of community was certainly lacking, and I don't know that I would have labeled myself an atheist until probably about 1996.
mm,
And we'll get there, but I didn't even know that that was a thing. I didn't know the title. I was like, my family's super religious, so just being completely surrounded by those people and losing my faith at a pretty early age was it was
mm,
pretty lonely experience. But so yeah, so my family super religious, Pentecostals.
mm.
So, you know, the speaking in tongues, the slayed in the spirit, all that wacky stuff. And I was a big reader when I was a kid. One of the things my mother really did for me was encourage literacy and reading.
Mm.
So, read the Bible, like read the Bible completely all the way through, probably around 8 or 9,
Okay.
maybe.
That's pretty young to
Um,
read it all the way through. Do you
oh
think you
yeah.
really understood everything at 9, reading it all the way through? Because I don't know if I would have.
I don't know that I understood everything, but I
Mm,
do remember approaching my mother with questions like, I thought you said witches weren't real.
mm,
Well, they're not. I'm
right.
like, okay, well, it says here that we should kill witches. Like,
Right.
were witches around then and now they're not? Like,
Right.
well, no, there's no real magic now. I'm like, okay, but you said witches get their power from demons. So are there still demons, or are demons not around still too? Go to your
Yeah.
room, Nate. Go to your room.
Right. Right.
So I
Yeah.
don't know that I really understood it, but like there were so many parts that I remember, like even like being like 8, 9 years old, that just were in such stark contrast from the values that the church was claiming to espouse.
Yeah.
Another one that really stuck out to me was the story of Abraham and Isaac, and
Mhm.
Isaac being taken up to be sacrificed to God, and then at the last minute he's like, "Just kidding, believe in Jesus."
Mm.
I'm
Yeah.
like,
Well, it's funny because you bring up this point too, where if you grew up around evangelicalism, which I did, I grew up around it. I don't know if my family was particularly evangelical, but it was definitely a part of the culture around me. Like there is this idea that, oh, you're supposed to spread the message to everybody and you're supposed to tell people about this thing. But as soon as you ask like really hard questions, suddenly you're kind of punished for it. Like there's weird consequences for asking like the wrong kinds of questions, which doesn't really make sense if the whole point is like, well, we're supposed to explain this religion to people. Like,
yeah,
why is there like a taboo there? It's very weird, very
it,
strange.
it's so weird, and I got that for years.
Mm,
For years, I went because
mhm,
again, my family is super religious. Church 3, 4 times a week. You've got Sunday school, Bible study, choir practice, all this stuff.
right.
And then when I finally read it and I start asking questions, and then all of a sudden I'm in trouble for it. It's like, well, what do you want? Like, you wanted me to read your book, and I read your book, and it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense.
Hmm.
So, to be vilified for that is very confusing for a child.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
especially in a really religious community, to go from being everyone's favorite to being kicked out of Sunday school and, being sat down in the pastor's office and, asking these questions. It's like, well, if God's all good, how did he create something evil? And why would he create something evil? And if he knew that he was going to turn against him, why would he create him in the first place?
Yeah. That's another aspect of it too. If I today, if I had a child and if there was a pastor in any community space, whether I was going to that church or not, I don't know why I'd be going to that church, but let's say there was a pastor somewhere in the community that which I was a part of, and they thought that they had the authority to tell my kid anything, I would just say absolutely not. Like, maybe if they have like a degree in religious scholarship or something, they could maybe tell them a thing or two. But like a pastor doing anything to my child, whether it's disciplining them or just like thinking that they have some sort of hierarchical place above them outside of just, being an adult and them being a kid, like it's really crazy to me now. Like it's so weird that, when I was a kid, pastors were such a different sort of person to me now. Now I just see them as, I don't know, somebody that runs a church, but like, that's it. I just see it as more like a career, not like as anything super spiritually special. But like, I feel like in evangelical spaces, there is kind of a mystique there a little bit around your pastors. They're supposed to be like the leaders of the flock,
Oh,
so,
yeah.
Very, very
it's like being sent to the principal's office, right?
Right.
You're supposed to feel this sense of dread because, oh, well, now you've asked the serious questions and now you're making the other kids think for themselves. So
right,
we're going to send you to the dungeon master.
Yeah,
better look out.
Yeah, that's so true. I just want to quickly interrupt, Nick, because we have open lines right now. And folks, we want to get to your calls tonight. So please call into the show. If you've thought about calling for a while, tonight's a good night to call in. We have open lines and we want to talk to you tonight. So we'll be taking your calls in just a second. So get on the line now. But yeah, Nate, so tell me, you're growing up in this church environment. You're kind of getting in trouble at church. What's next for little Nate's life?
Little Nate was very hungry for the truth, which is
the truth was wanted.
Yes, maybe that's why I ended up on this show, right?
That's it. You did it. You made your aspirations become a reality. So happy for you. This is it.
Way to go, 8-year-old Nate. You got there. You've arrived.
You did it. This is peak. You're peaking right now.
Oh yeah.
So good. So good.
No, I had like these little tests I would do, and I would like balance a pencil on the end of a table just so that it was almost at the point where it would fall. And I would sit there and I would pray for God to knock it over because I wanted to know if it was real. I knew something was up, and I'm like, I want to see a sign. Give me a sign. Show me that you're there, because the Sunday school teachers, the pastors, my mother, nobody really wants to actually take me seriously. No one wants to actually have an honest conversation. And like, again, I was a big reader when I was a kid. So like, for me to actually read this book that was so central to our lives, have it not make sense, like have the narrative not make sense, and then ask honest questions, and all of a sudden I'm shut down. I'm like, well, now I want to actually know, is this for real or not? So I would set up a little pencil, and then if that didn't work, I would try to move it with the power of my mind, and I would stare at that pencil, and I'd be like, right. And it never went. And sometimes I'd leave the room, and then I'd pray again, see if that worked. And spoiler alert, it didn't work. The pencil didn't move.
Yeah. And let me point this out too, because, and maybe somebody would call in to complain about this, because there are Christians that will say, well, that's not how it works. That's not how it's supposed to work. That's not how prayer is supposed to be a thing. But if you're supposed to, like, faith of a mustard seed, right? Like faith of a mustard seed means like anything can happen. If Jesus could like multiply fish and bread out of nowhere, that's not any crazier than trying to make a pencil move with your mind.
No.
And if you read the Acts of the Apostles, right, like they are continuing that tradition of like doing miracles and stuff for people. So like Christians are supposed to be able to do stuff. And in the Pentecostal environment too, like that's supposed to be a thing that happens every Sunday. You're supposed to be seeing all kinds of stuff. So
absolutely.
Yeah, so like and this idea that you can't just test it like that. Well, it's like, well, why not? Like that's kind of part of the point, isn't it, to be able to do that kind of stuff? But anyway, it obviously
Yeah.
does make sense.
Well, yeah, and there's a passage in there about being shown and being asking the Spirit of God to come into you, and it almost certainly will. And while
Right.
I mean, if God's this powerful creature and he can't move a fucking pencil, well, this ain't looking so good for your whole system here.
Yeah, for sure. So you're kind of growing up now. You're having these doubts. So how did you move? What was the label shifter for you?
I had an event that really changed my life when I was about maybe 12 years old. I don't remember exactly how old I was, 12, 13. But like my parents in the church were kind of in damage control mode at this point. So I was sent to a youth retreat against my will, a Pentecostal youth retreat. And all the kids were lined up around the outside of the room, and we were all going to be slayed in the spirit. Do you know what being slayed in the spirit is?
I know what being slayed in the spirit is, but you should explain to the audience, especially those who don't know about Pentecostal traditions, what that is.
I will explain what being slayed in the spirit is. It is the moment that you become filled with the Holy Spirit. Right?
Not a euphemism.
You're overcome. No, this isn't Thursday. This is Friday.
This isn't Thursday. This isn't secular sexuality. This is Truth Wanted. So
different show. Okay.
Yeah, right.
So in a completely platonic manner, the pastor comes around and he gives you a little bop on the head. It's kind of like those little trust exercises where you fall back and everyone catches you.
Right.
And after a particularly moving service and a call to the altar, and now we're going to do this. We're going to line you all, and you're sort of going to be inaugurated. You're going to come into your own as a full member of the church, because now you're old enough to feel the power of the Holy Spirit. And so they're going around the room, and I was honestly really excited, Dan. I was like, finally, like this is the moment where like I'm gonna know, because I'm watching him bop these kids on the head, and they're like, "Oh, I come over with a case of the vapors. I can't stand up no more." And they're all falling down. And these are like, these kids are my friends, so I wouldn't think that they're all just faking it. That can't be what's happening. They're being slayed in the spirit. And he goes around, bop, 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 and he's coming up to me, and my heart's going a mile a minute, and I'm like, this is it. This is finally it. And he bops me on the forehead, and I'm like, okay,
nothing happened.
Is something supposed to happen?
Right.
And he said some words, something else to sort of meant to hype me up, make me play along, and he bops me on the head again, and I'm like, and it dawned on me. I don't know if maybe like the bop on the head was what finally jarred my brain into being like, you're all playing along. You're all just making this up. None of this is real.
Right.
This is all crap.
Yeah.
All of it.
Yeah, it's weird. I think like I knew some Pentecostals growing up, and I remember having this conversation in college with somebody about Pentecostalism and their sort of evidences towards, this whole thing being real. And somebody made this argument to me that, well, it just doesn't make sense. Like, how could all of these people be faking this every week, right? If this was a thing. But I think we have to be careful when we say that they're faking it, because it's not faking it in the same sense that somebody is deliberately trying to scam somebody or put a falsehood in somebody's mind that something is happening when it actually isn't. I think for most Pentecostals who have that experience, they are primed to react and respond in an environment that they are, a lot of them, trained since birth to do. Just from like it's like a monkey see, monkey do kind of thing.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
I don't think it. Yeah, I don't think it's a bunch of people who have all like, coalesced together and are like, all right, we're going to do this thing together on 3, 1, 2, 3, and then like go out and play these roles. I think it's just, an excitement from being in a crowd of people and seeing a bunch of other people have these experiences, and then it just kind of gets people caught in the moment there. Which is it's a weird thing for people. I've noticed this when I've talked to people outside of the U.S. who don't see a lot of Pentecostals who really don't understand it. I think that's the best way I can explain it to people from my understanding of it. But I didn't grow up Pentecostal, so I don't know.
Yeah, it's peer pressure.
Yeah.
It's it's the urge to perform.
Right.
It's you want to please. Like glossolalia is a thing, right?
Mhm.
Like it's not something that they're deliberately doing to deceive everybody else. They really believe that they're speaking in tongues.
Right.
And I guess in a certain way of looking at it, they are. They are speaking, and they are speaking with their tongue. It's just they're not being motivated by a third of God. It's
right.
just it's just pressure to perform, and you want to fit in.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a big part of it. So you had this experience, you didn't fall down. What happened next? Did people just like look at you funny, or what happened?
Oh, it got a lot worse for me over the next couple of years, because my family was still religious. They still wanted me to go to youth group, and I started skipping out. Didn't want to go. I would literally sit outside the church because I wasn't allowed to come home until the youth group was over. So I would sit across from the church, just like, I'm not gonna do it. You can't drag me in there. Those people don't like me. I don't like them. You're all lying to me. There was one man, one church leader, who's actually, his son is still a really good friend of mine, and he's still a church leader. He's actually a youth pastor now. But his father was the one person in that entire community that actually tried to sit me down and have a theological discussion with a 12-year-old or 10-year-old. And I remember those sessions in his basement. The man's name is Gary Kivel. He passed away a couple of years ago. But the impact that man had on my life was huge, because he was the one person that actually was willing to tackle these issues, even though, he didn't succeed and he was incorrect. It kind of gave me a hint that, well, maybe not everybody's just going to kick me out of their in-group because I'm asking questions, or because I don't believe the same thing they do. So that was a little bit of a, sort of ameliorated the damage, I guess. That's good. I ended up, like, I would spend, at this point, I had big schism with my family. Like, I would get kicked out for the day. I wouldn't be allowed back. I'd go to the public library, and I would just sit there and read books until the sun went down and come back. And one day I came across a book on intelligent design. So,
okay.
Yeah. So this was, I actually still have the book. If I can find it here, maybe now's not the best time.
Maybe not. Maybe different time.
I have the book. It's called Darwin's Black Box by Michael Behe. And you probably know about this. He was the guy that got called into the court case, right, to defend having creationism in school. And again, it was kind of like another one of those moments for me where I'm like, well, maybe this has something to it. Maybe it's just a lot more complex than we understand, right? And maybe the answers just aren't found in this book from, 2,500 years ago. Maybe we just didn't figure it out yet, and it took the science to figure it out. And then we come to that roadblock where it's like, here you shall go and no further. And so I read the book, and I found it pretty convincing. Right, like because it is a fairly convincing series of examples of how difficult it would be for certain biological functions to evolve.
I think if you don't give a comprehensive understanding of intelligent design arguments, if you don't recognize the flaws there, I think to the average person, I think they're probably one of the more convincing kinds of arguments you can give for apologetics. Yeah, I'm not saying that they're good
Absolutely.
necessarily arguments, right? But like if you don't study philosophy, or if you don't study science, if it's like if you're just hearing these for the first time, I think that on a whole, they're probably one of the more convincing. Absolutely, yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Like the
Mhm.
irreducible complexity and the
Right.
mousetrap analogy is really it's a really powerful example. And so I was like, wow, maybe there's something to this. And I thought, what if there's a rebuttal? I want to hear like someone who doesn't agree with this person. And at that point, I came across Richard Dawkins, who I'm
Mm.
sorry he's turned out to be a bit of a douche lately, but
Yeah, no kidding.
but I came across Richard Dawkins' book, The Blind Watchmaker, and I'm like, oh, okay. So there is a good reason. There is an explanation for this. You just weren't creative enough or smart enough or honest enough to present it. And then
Yeah.
from then on, I was into, Christopher Hitchens and
Mm.
Dan Dennett and all these atheist writers. And I'm just like, it was like the world opened up. And I'm like, there are people who don't believe either. And they've written books and their arguments actually make sense.
Yeah, it is kind of weird for me to have this discovery too, in the sense like, oh, there's all kinds of people who have written against all this stuff that I've heard my entire life, and I didn't know these books were out there, because if the people I knew about them, then they wouldn't believe in the same stuff either, probably. you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, as far as myself, like I think I subscribe to a special creation view of mankind. I thought mankind was created by God, but like evolution could still also work simultaneously. I don't know how that actually worked. If you probe me, I don't know if I could give you a great answer, but that was kind of the schema I was working with.
Okay.
But I find that tends to be a common thing with a lot of Christians. They either fully reject it, or they kind of put evolution somehow in a way that still makes sense as a Christian, even though now I don't think it really makes sense at all. But that's interesting. That's interesting. You kind of had a deep dive in the literature there and realized that everything kind of didn't make sense at the end of the day, huh?
It was such a liberating moment for me, that week where I was reading The Blind Watchmaker.
Mm.
And this was like, I think The Blind Watchmaker was published in the late 80s. So this was like 10 years before Behe even wrote his book.
Mm.
And there was already a rebuttal out there. So
Right.
had he done some honest research, he could have found it, because I found it and I was 16 years old,
So there you go. If you want to become an atheist and you don't have the internet, you just go to your library. I guess that's what we're learning here, at least from your story. But that's good. That's good. I'm glad that you're here talking to us today, Nate. And I'm glad that we're going to be able to talk to some other people about their stories too.